Let's deepen our analysis and bring in Michael Shurkin, who's Director of Global Programs at 14 North Strategies in Washington, D.C. Michael, thanks for being with us here in France 24. We appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the situation in Mali, because clearly it is of extreme gravity, as General Goita is saying. Many people mightn't have any sympathy with him. But one must wonder what is in store, given what the Tuaregs and the jihadists are planning, what they're saying. And I'm wondering how you see the next 24, 48 hours panning out and beyond for Mali.
Well, first thing that needs to be said is that there's a very high coup risk. Historically, we've seen in Mali as well as in Burkina Faso, where after suffering significant setbacks and defeats, that parts of the military who are frustrated and disgruntled and demoralized decide that they could do a better job, so they take a swipe at whoever happens to be in charge. This happened twice in Mali in the last 10, 20 years. This also happened twice in Burkina Faso. So I really would not be surprised if in the next few days there was a coup by some portion of the Malian military, which in many ways would be bad, because that just adds another degree of instability to the Malian government, the Malian military, and uncertainty and turbulence at a time when they really, really need to be working together in unity and with one mind. Other than that, one thing that's really very clear is that it's the JNIM, the jihadists, and then the rebel group, the FLA, who have the initiative here. They've had the initiative for some time. Now they clearly have it. The Malian government is on the back foot. They are reacting to whatever the rebels and the jihadists are doing. So thus, it's kind of up to the jihadists and the rebels to decide what they're going to do. That said, the rebels are really more interested in securing the north. JNIM has larger ambitions. And then it becomes a question of, well, what exactly are the ambitions of JNIM? And there it's something that is yet to really emerge, yet to become clear. We know that JNIM wants to impose Sharia law on Mali, but beyond that, it's not clear. Do they want to topple the government, replace the government? Do they want some sort of weird cohabitation where they can impose terms on the government? That sort of thing. But unfortunately, it really looks like, again, JNIM and FLA, they have the initiative, and I think that they've got the wherewithal to actually achieve their objectives. It's just a question of how long and with how much patience they can pull this off. Meanwhile, the Malian government needs to organize itself and figure out what its strategy moving forward it has to be. Are they going to give up the north? Are they not going to give up the north? How are they going to allocate their scarce resources? Everybody should remember that Mali is a gigantic country. Northern Mali itself is the size of Texas, only without roads, effectively. So moving around and moving troops around and reinforcing troops is an extremely difficult thing to do. They're really in a very difficult spot right now. It's really very alarming what's happening.
Once upon a time, there was the Operation Barkhane, France's operation against jihadists across the whole Sahel region, including, of course, Mali. That was kicked out in 2022. The order from Mali was to get the French troops out, get the UN peacekeepers out, and basically bring in Russian Wagner mercenaries to do the job at an extortionate amount of money per month that the French mission was doing for free. That's obviously an economic question, which maybe we could dissect in another way. But clearly, bad decision on paper financially by General Goita and his associates. But I'm wondering what precisely has been going on in terms of in their heads, because the Tuareg issue has always been there all along and was there when they took over, as was the issue with the jihadists. So what have they been getting wrong in terms of how they've dealt with these groups?
Oh boy, I can go on for hours about this. I think that the Malians have made really two major strategic mistakes. One mistake was kicking out the French and replacing them with the Russians. Now, there are lots of reasons why they did this. They're frustrated with the French. They actually suspected that the French were actually siding with the rebels and with the jihadists for all sorts of reasons. It's really very complicated, but at the end of the day, they're very frustrated with the French. They thought that the French were ultimately an obstacle to victory, and that the French really wanted the war to endure because that would justify their continued military presence in Mali and the Sahel. That's kind of the theory that I think a lot of Malians really actually believe. There are many problems with that, but one of the things is that by kicking out the French and then calling in the Russians is that logically it makes no sense. I mean, if you're frustrated with the performance of the French military under Operation Barkhane had a brigade, which is about 5,000 people, with about a half dozen combat jets and precision strike capabilities, plus potent ISR capabilities, plus the receiving intel and ISR from the Americans. If you're frustrated by how poorly they appear to be doing, there's no reason to expect that a smaller Russian force with less capabilities would actually do any better. And it seems to be that the French thought that they would, because they thought that, I mean, the Malians seemed to think that they would be better off the Russians, because the Russians would somehow be less of an obstacle than the French. They suspected the French were playing some weird double game. They figured the Russians wouldn't. The French were always lecturing them about who the bad guys were, and the Russians wouldn't care. The Russians would kill whomever the Malian government told them to care. There's another aspect to this, which is that I heard at least one Malian officer say, when I talked to him years ago, where he said to me that he wished that the Russians were there, not the French. And I asked him why, because to me, Russian counterinsurgency, like in Grozny, is like blow everything up and kill everybody. That's not good. And he said, well, no, actually, like at least the Russians would enlever les gants, would take off the gloves. The theory being that the French are just too careful, too nice, they're always hectoring everybody about civil rights, to France's credit. And they didn't want that. They thought that they needed to be tough. So that's part of the appeal of the Russians. Plus, they wouldn't be playing any double games, which he suspected the French of doing. And then of course, once the Russians show up, the Russians are both involved in human rights violations, and the Russian presence kind of encourages the Malian government to the Malian military to commit human rights violations of their own. And with the result being that most of the scholars agree, actually pushed a large number of civilians into the arms of JNIM, particularly the Fulani community, which has really suffered as a result of the violence against civilians done by the Mali military with the Russians. The second major mistake that I think that they made was that the Malians were absolutely determined to start an open war with the rebel groups, the predominantly Arab and Tuareg groups that are in northern Mali. The French had forced them into a peace process they didn't really like. The French kept saying, and the Americans as well, don't fight the Tuareg, don't fight the Arabs. You got to have a political accommodation with them. Focus on the jihadists. For the Malians, this made no sense whatsoever, because for the Malians, some Malians, I should say, the rebels and the jihadists are one and the same people, and you can't really solve the jihadist problem unless you solve the rebel problem, because again, they're one and the same people. So they're itching for a fight, and they're really bothered by the fact that the French are kind of keeping them from the fight, and the UN was there to facilitate peace between Mali and the northern rebel militant groups. And there's supposed to be a disarmament program and integrating the fighters into the army, et cetera, et cetera. So they kicked the French out, they kicked the UN out, thus the buffer between the Malian army and the rebels is gone. And then in August of 2023, the Malian military, with the Russians, went on the offensive. They're like, finally, we can finally deal with this problem. But it's absolute madness from a military point of view, because what they've done is they have, they're already fighting JNIM, they're fighting Islamic State. They're not doing well. They are at best at a strategic, a stalemate. So now they go and pick and fight with the third enemy, right? So they expand the front and expand the number of resources, the number of places where they have to allocate their military resources, including the Russians. It's a huge mistake. When they seized Kidal in November of 2023, I remember saying in writing that this is like when Napoleon seized Moscow. Very good, but what's it really going to do for you strategically? In fact, this just makes everything worse, because it makes everything more vulnerable. And
Michael, are the Russians going to actually weigh in on this
Sure.
one in terms of changing how it all develops, or are the Russians actually going to pull out, as the Tuaregs are saying that they should do? I'm wondering, is this going to be a bloodbath?
So I think I really hope it's not going to be a bloodbath for any of the people concerned.
Of course.
I know that the Northerners really hate the Russians, and they want the Russians gone, which creates a bargaining position, because it's something that the Malian government could concede for. I think for the Russians, it's like they have to weigh, on one hand, they have an interest in sticking around and trying to show their solidarity with the Malian government, politically and diplomatically. But at the same time, they're taking losses, and for what? For what reason? So I'm sure there's an intense debate going on in Moscow about the pros and the cons of sticking it out. There is a question of what more the Russians can possibly do. The Russians, for obvious reasons, have limited resources because they're very busy elsewhere. And it's just not really clear. But also, it's clear that the Malian military plus the Russians is not sufficient for defeating the jihadists and the rebels, which is what the Malian government was really banking on. They thought that that combination would be sufficient to defeat their enemies when it really was not. And even if the Russians stuck around, unless the Russians were somehow able to really reinforce their deployment in Mali, and I doubt they can do that, then I see just the net getting tighter and everything getting tighter around Bamako, around the parts of Mali that the Malian government controls. And slowly but surely things are going to get worse and worse and worse for the Malian state and for the people, for that zone of that rump Mali is going to just kind of shrink and just become increasingly miserable.
Michael, thank you very much indeed. I know there is so much more to say because this is an incredibly layered conflict with very different things happening on different levels. But Michael Shurkin shining some light on aspects of what's happening in Mali that perhaps we hadn't considered. Michael, thank you very much indeed, Director of Global Programs at 40 North Strategies in Washington. Thanks for your time and thank you for joining us, Francis. We really appreciate it. See you again, I hope. Thank you very much indeed.